All right, everybody. Welcome to the week 1 of our IEP Support Series. So glad that you guys could all make it. We did it in person around lunchtime today, and it went really well. So hopefully this afternoon's series will also go really well. Before we get started, I just want you to know this is very informal. If you have a question, please unmute and ask your question. I'll also be monitoring the chat box, so if you would prefer to drop your question in the chat box, that is fine as well. You guys obviously all got the email with the link because you made it here tonight. Also on that email is a copy of the presentation and also a copy of a personal acronym dictionary. We tend to speak in acronyms in special education, and sometimes we need a little clarity on what that means. My name is Janine Dixon, and I will be leading the 6-week IEP Support Series. I started my career in special education in 2016 when I taught middle schoolers who were emotionally disturbed for 5 years. Loved it. It was a roller coaster. Every day was different. Then I went down to the lower school and taught for 5 years there as well. And in the summers, I would teach at LSU's Cox Center for Academic Excellence. So lots of different ages that I've covered and had experience with. Around year 8 of teaching, I started advocating on the side for families that have kids with special needs, just to help them navigate the system. The system is tricky, and seeing it from the school side, I think it gives me a little bit of an interesting perspective on how to navigate the system. That became more of a full-time job, so I left the classroom, and for the last 7 years have been advocating for families that have kids with special needs to navigate the system, fight the system, get services for kids. And I've also contracted with LRCE to teach the next generation of special education teachers how to do right for kids. So from ages 3 to about age 60 or so is where my experience lies. I am super passionate. I really could talk about special ed all day, every day. So if you have a question, please unmute, ask it. If I don't know the answer, I'll be super transparent about that too, and we will find the answer together. So without further ado, that's a little about me. That's a little about the materials, your acronym dictionary, and the materials for this week. Materials every week will be attached to the virtual invitation. So you guys will have access to that. If you lose it, or you lose your invitation, or something crazy happens, email me and I'll send it to you. So this week, we are going to start with part 1, my kid isn't thriving in school, what can I do? And part 2, how do I get an IEP for my child? So let's go. My kid isn't thriving in school, what can I do? So one thing that you guys probably realized when you took a look at the presentation is it is very text heavy. I'm going to try not to read it to you, but I wanted you to have all of the information so that when this series is over, you still have all of the information and you weren't frantically trying to write everything down. So yeah, that's why it's text heavy. Sorry, it's a lot of information. All right, so to voice your concern in a way you'll be heard, first we need to talk the talk. So we need to be picking up the keywords from these different presentations over the next 6 weeks, specifically regarding the different laws and how to use those words to leverage what you want. We are going to be talking about taking charge. This is your child. You have the highest stake in your child because they are yours. Always remembering that if it sounds fishy, it probably is. If the school tells you, oh, we don't offer that, and that doesn't seem right to you, it's probably not right. That's something we need to dig into a little deeper. Bring your support person. Please bring a support person. It does not have to be an advocate. It can be your neighbor or your mom or random person you find on the way to the meeting. But bring someone with you to be your moral support and to take notes and to be another set of ears. Keep calm and advocate on. And hopefully by the end of this 6 weeks, you will feel super informed on making that happen. And Christy, thank you for your comment about never hesitating to seek help from an advocate, even if you are familiar. Sometimes just having it come from a different person's voice will help you to be heard. All right, so there are several of you guys in the meeting tonight, and chances are all of your children are in a different place in their educational journey. So for today, we're going to take the first half of the session to talk about the different places you might be in your journey. And then the second part of tonight, we're going to be talking specifically about getting that IEP locked in. All right, so for each of those areas, whether you are at the SBLC meeting phase, or your child is in intervention, or you're doing response to intervention, you have an IAP or a 504 plan, you have an IEP, or you want to reconvene the meeting, no matter what place you are on that spectrum, we're going to talk about what is that thing, what can you expect when you go to that place or that meeting, who should be in attendance in that meeting, and how you can be the most effective advocate possible for your kid when you're in that meeting. So we'll start with school building level committee, SBLC, because that is like the lightest form of talking about your child's needs. So it's informal. It is school-based group who meet periodically to discuss student performance. And it's typically the first line of defense outside of the teacher's classroom for students who are struggling. It's typically done after each 9-week grading period or 7-week grading period, whatever your school does. And it's typically the teacher, and they're sitting around and they're trying to talk about the kids who are not meeting expectations. Typically, parents are not invited to these because the meeting is talking about all the kids really quickly, deciding who needs to go to intervention, who needs extra help, who needs what, and it's done without parental involvement. However, if your kid is struggling and you're like, wow, we really need to talk about my child, you can ask for an SBLC meeting, and that is what you ask for. And specifically asking for an SBLC meeting lets the school know, oh, this parent knows a little something about this because they're using the vocabulary. If you request that SBLC meeting, the person in attendance will likely be one or more of your student's teachers, the SBLC coordinator, who is usually a member of the administration, and the parents if invited. Of course, if you initiate the meeting, you're invited. How to be effective. And a lot of these you'll see are redundant throughout the different kinds of meetings. So we'll go over them once really well now, and then we'll just kind of refer back to them as needed. Go prepared with questions written out before you arrive. It can be very overwhelming to arrive at a meeting where you think it might just be you and 1 or 2 people, and then there's 10 people in the room. And at some point in the meeting, they all look at you and say, what are your concerns? And it's very overwhelming. And a lot of parents are like, you're kind of lost for words. So go prepared with your questions. What do you want to talk about? What are your specific concerns? Number 2, bring work samples to be able to ask questions about specific kinds of work. My number 1 example is spelling tests. A lot of kids, you know, they have a lined piece of paper. The teacher says, number 1, spell vague. Number 2, spell whatever the next word is. And that's not always accessible to some of our kids. So be able to bring those work samples so you can ask specific questions can be really helpful. Bring report cards, bring your progress reports, any other documentation that you have to build a case as to why your kid needs help. If your student has behavioral referrals or behavioral reports, bring those. Organize all of this before you go. The meeting will be stressful enough without you having to flip through, 50 pieces of paper to try to find what you need. I always recommend have a binder for your for your student. I have one for both of my kids, and it's sectioned off in progress reports and report cards, test samples. If there's a test that I thought might be a little fishy, I keep that one. Things that they do really well on, and then outside information. So if their speech therapist or occupational therapist has sent a report, there's a place for that as well. All right. So second kind of line of defense for our kids who are not thriving are interventions. And those are evidence-based programs that are put into place with students, and they're designed to help close the gap between the child's performance level and the benchmark of where we want our kids to be. Examples: I.E.P, Reading Mastery, Lexia, MobyMax, there's tons of them. It's a lucrative business to be in the business of intervention, so there's a lot out there. And what you can expect with interventions is that some schools build intervention time into the daily schedule. So at 10 o'clock every day, every kid goes to some intervention. Other schools pick and choose which kids are going to go to which interventions, and they pull them typically from ancillary elective classes, from their art class or PE. Sometimes the teachers lead the interventions, sometimes the school uses paraeducators. It really just depends, and it is school-based decisions. So unfortunately, that's one of those things that's not really regulated, and so all the different schools' model looks different. Who attends interventions? In some schools, they benchmark all their kids. If a student is below whatever the benchmark is for that time of year, they pull all those kids, and those kids get interventions. Some don't offer interventions if you haven't made the request. So if you notice that your child is struggling in a particular area, use your voice and ask, is my child receiving interventions? And if not, we need to talk about my child receiving interventions. If your child is in interventions, one thing I highly recommend that you do is periodically request the intervention data. This is going to, number one, keep the school accountable for pulling your child for those interventions, and it's going to let you see where your student is progressing or maybe not progressing. And the second thing is, if you have a student who is communicative in a way that they can tell you about the interventions, ask them about them. Do you like the intervention? Do you feel like it's helpful for you? When do you go? That's how I found out that my kid, who lives and breathes for band class, was being pulled from band class. So we had a meeting with the intervention coordinator, and we got that moved to a different time. I did not want them taking away the one thing where she really excels to go spend more time doing something that she really, really, really doesn't like to do. Data, yes. Loretta dropped in the comments box, needed that reminder. Data, it's time. It is time. It is always a good time to ask for the data. And if they cannot produce the data, something might be going on, something fishy. All right, so if we are doing the interventions and our kid still is not thriving, what is our next step? And that is to move to a response to intervention. It's very similar to interventions. We're just being a little more proactive about collecting that data to make decisions. Response to intervention was Louisiana's solution. We were over-identifying kids as special needs or special education students, but really they only needed a subset of skills to be remediated. And so Louisiana went to the RTI model, saying before we identify all these kids as being special needs, some of them are, but some of them only need some interventions. So let's just do the interventions and then see how it goes. What you can expect, ideally, is the school does the intervention with your child. After a few weeks, they analyze it and they say, oh, this intervention is really working for this kid. The kid is responding to the intervention. Let's keep it up, keep up the good work, keep closing those gaps in learning. As the student continues to close the gap in learning, we're monitoring, we're eventually backing off. So maybe going from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, to 2 to 1, and then our child is back in all gen ed regular classes. If the student does not respond to intervention, so RTI, respond to intervention, then that student should be referred to pupil appraisal for additional testing to start the special education assessment. Who attends if we're talking about RTI? If you are called in to discuss RTI, then that is going to be considered an SBLC meeting. If the school has determined before the meeting that they think your child is a child that should be evaluated for special education, then a pupil appraisal representative may attend. Pupil appraisal is the entity within the school board that is responsible for assessing our students and generally policing special education. Different places call it different things. If you're in Zachary, they call it SASE. If you are in Ascension, that is LeBlanc Special Services. If you are, if you're in EBR, sometimes they call it the Goodwood Center because it's on Goodwood. So depending on where you are, it can be called different things, but if you're calling around, looking, asking, you call it pupil appraisal. How to be effective. Know that it is your right to request that your child be assessed before, during, or after the RTI process. If you have a child that is struggling and you have been in RTI for ages and you're requesting, my kid needs an evaluation, don't let them put you off and say, oh, well, we have to finish our RTI data. There is a memo from the Department of Education saying that the state cannot delay an evaluation for RTI. You're going to request that intervention data and know that once you get the results of that special education evaluation, your child may or may not be eligible for special education. If they are, that's one path we'll talk about after the break. If they are not eligible for an IEP or special education services, that's okay. We have other avenues to secure support for your child. Roadblock warning for RTI. So although our state has implemented the RTI model, they have not defined parameters for using RTI. So there's no set, oh, we have to do it for 8 weeks, or oh, you have to do it for 10 weeks or 12 weeks. There's no limit. So we have some kids that get stuck in what I call the revolving door of interventions, and they never move on to the evaluation phase. I've had clients that call me and say, my kid has been in intervention for 2 years, and they're failing, and I don't know what to do. And so we move on and we request the IEP, the evaluation for special education. But just because we have RTI doesn't mean it's working perfectly. As the parents, we need to be informed in when it's time to call it and say, no, it's time for the eval. All right, some of your students may have a 504 plan. The official term for that is the Individual Accommodation Plan, or I.E.P. It's just more commonly called a 504 plan. It is completely different and separate from special education. It is governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act, whereas special education is governed under federal law IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So two totally different things. An IAP, to be considered eligible for an IAP, the student must have a medical diagnosis and be showing a need. So we have to have two forms of documentation, the diagnosis and the need. What you can expect at your IAP meetings is that the IAP will provide access to instruction through accommodations, such as having things read aloud, getting extended time, small group testing, preferential seating, but they do not provide specialized instruction. And I love Jamie's question. She dropped in the chat, can a child have an IAP and an IEP? And the answer is weird. The answer is yes and no. Let me explain. Theoretically, an IEP trumps an IAP. So whatever would be on the IAP, we can write into the IEP. However, some districts, if you have a child who is gifted and talented, will have an IEP to address the gifted and talented needs, and an IAP to address things like extended time for students who have, say, ADD or ADHD and need extended time. So we would call those students twice exceptional. And sometimes, yes, they do have both, but the legislation for the IEP is a little tighter than for the IAP. And you guys, please, please feel free to unmute at any time and talk to me. It's kind of weird just seeing a whole bunch of pictures, but I get it. Not everybody feels like being on the camera. Jamie says, okay, I understand. Asking because my son just received a new diagnosis in addition to autism. So Jamie, if your son already has an IEP, what we would want to do is reconvene, and we'll talk about how to do that in just a second, that IEP to add these additional concerns. And we can do that through an amendment, unless it's something really big that would like add some kind of other service, and then we would ask for a reevaluation. But it depends on how impactful this new diagnosis might be. You're welcome. Loretta says that she would get off camera, but she's on a ladder painting. I feel like maybe you need the accommodation of being off camera. All right, so who attends those 504 meetings? Theoretically, it's you, at least one of your kids' teachers, and the 504 coordinator, who is often the guidance counselor. We put a lot on our guidance counselors. They are often the 504 coordinator, the SBLC coordinator, the testing coordinator, and all the other things. So that's who you can expect to be in your meeting. For being effective, same thing. Go with your questions prepared, your work samples, your documentation, be organized, and please, please take a support person with you. All right, now here's probably what you all came for, although in the in-person session this afternoon, we had a lot of 504 plan parents. So that was kind of interesting, but we're gonna talk now about the IEP. We use Bulletin 1508. That is our pupil appraisal handbook. That guides who is eligible to receive special education services. So under federal law, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there are these categories: autism, intellectual impairment, orthopedic impairment, specific learning disability. And if your child has a specific learning disability, we have to say, what is it specific about? So I have a daughter who has SLD, specific learning disability, in reading, spelling, and writing. Then we've got speech language delay, other health impairment, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, deafness, deaf-blind, visual impairment, multiple disabilities, and traumatic brain injury. And then in Louisiana, we have our own special category, developmental delay, which is used for our kiddos that are little, our young ones, and that diagnosis expires at age 9. So if you do have a child and their exceptionality is developmental delay, then pupil appraisal will automatically initiate an evaluation or a reevaluation sometime during their 8th year, because we want to make sure that if this is a student that's going to continue to qualify, we get them qualified under one of those other disability categories. Or maybe the delay has closed and the student does not need special education anymore, at which point they are dismissed or they graduate from special education. What can you expect from an IEP meeting? They're pretty long. Pretty much almost always should be at least an hour or longer. And each person there should discuss the child's progress as pertains to their area of expertise. You should expect to walk into a whole room full of people. Bring your support person to balance the room, to be there for moral support, to take notes frantically, to be a second set of ears. Everybody in that meeting is there to talk about your kid. They are all experts in either curriculum or learning or school-based therapies, but you are the expert on your child. So in legislation, it is very clear that the parent is a very important part of the IEP team. And we will talk about that in a future session. Who has to attend an IEP meeting? So by law, there are a few people that have to attend. It has to be one regular education teacher, one special education teacher, the ODR, or official designated representative of the school, which is usually the principal. If they're not available, they can appoint their assistant principal or their guidance counselor. They can appoint someone else. Any related service providers that work with your child, including occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, adapted physical education, the nurse, the school counselor, an outside counselor, the parent guardian, and then the student also should be invited to the meeting when it's appropriate. So it may not be appropriate for your kid to be in the whole, hour and a half meeting, but they might want to come in and talk about what their strengths are. I really love and appreciate when teachers invite the student to their IEP and they get to come in and say, I feel like I'm really good at this, and here's the things that I'm not really good at. And then we can make a plan and include the student in their plan. Angela asks a really good question. Would you bring paperwork from your child's doctor for the IEP meeting if applicable? Absolutely. You can also scan it in and email it to the teacher of record, the person who's writing your child's IEP, and say, hey, I really want you to be able to incorporate some of this information into the IEP. And they can do that. You will likely be asked to sign consent for the school nurse to call the child's doctor just to make sure that's an actual document that you got from the doctor. You'd be surprised at the lengths some people might go to fabricate documents. So if they ask you to sign that document, it's not because they want to be nitpicky, but they do want to make sure that they are getting the right information. And so the doctors, they know what they're allowed to release versus what they're not allowed to release, and it's typically the diagnosis and their recommendations. Additional people can attend with parents' written acceptance. So you guys will see as your students get older, get to high school, that we may want to invite outside agencies like Louisiana Rehabilitative Services or the C.A.R.E.S, or if there are any other service providers in your areas that help provide services for adults with special needs. We might want to start inviting those agencies when our kids are 16 years plus. But they cannot do that without your consent. So they would be sending home something for you to sign to say, yes, it is okay to invite these people. Now, as the parent, you can invite anybody you want. You've got a really great neighbor who knows a lot about it, bring the neighbor. Your mom, has been a special education teacher for 40 years, bring your mom. You can bring anybody you want, undisclosed, with one exception, and that is an attorney. If you bring an attorney, the school attorney has to be there. It shuts down the meeting. Now, it doesn't mean you can't bring your attorney. You absolutely can. You just have to disclose that prior to the meeting so that the school attorney can be there as well. And the flip side is also applicable. If you show up thinking that it's an IEP meeting with just your child's service providers and they have their lawyer present, you can say, no, if you have counsel, then I need to have my counsel as well. And you can stop the meeting. How to be effective, again, please write down your questions before you get there. Mostly the rest of them are the same, except number 7, ask for a draft copy of the proposed IEP a week before the meeting to review. So an IEP is not considered official until after the meeting, when everyone has signed and the parent and the ODR have signed at the end of the meeting saying, yes, this is good and we're going with it. Everything before that is considered a draft. And so the teacher will typically start to work on her draft copy of your child's IEP a few weeks before the meeting. They have to gather data. I mean, it's not something that you just sit down an hour before the meeting and just, punch out on your keyboard. It's something that you go into the state electronic record system and you open it and you start working on it. If your child has related service providers like the school nurse or your physical therapist or the speech therapist, that teacher will say, hey guys, this IEP is open. You can go in and start working on it now. So there is a draft. Is it going to be a completely finished, beautiful, perfect copy before the meeting? No, and it's not supposed to be. You're supposed to be a part of that, making decisions, adding information, but you can absolutely ask for the draft. That way you can at least get familiar with how things are formatted, where the information lives, what it will look like. Mandy shares that she brought her diagnostic paperwork to the initial meeting because she has a primary diagnosis with lots of secondary ones that all show proof of a need for an IEP, and it was helpful to prove her need for it. Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime you can bring evidence or justification for what you're asking for, the stronger your ask is. Roadblock warning for IEPs. Parents often feel absolutely overwhelmed by these meetings. There are so many people in the room. They all seem to have their own agenda. They want to get in, they want to get out, they want to say their piece and go. What I've heard from clients is, no one listened to me. I felt steamrolled. It went so fast, I couldn't keep up with what was happening. And some parents just go, well, I mean, I guess they know what they're doing. Even though, you know, maybe their child's IEP is not very strong or not very good. Bring your support person. Demand that the meeting slow down if you feel like it's going too fast, and ask for clarification. If you don't understand something, it is absolutely okay for you to say, I need clarification on what that means. Remember to use your tips for how to be effective. Print the slide. You need to print the slide. Print the slide for everyone and say, I'm going to be doing these things, so be on your best behavior. All right, some of you guys, I'm positive, have students with an IEP. And you can reconvene the IEP at any time, which is not something that everybody knows. I have a lot of clients who come and they say, well, I don't think it's working and I'd like to change it, but we already had her IEP meeting this year. And my response is, you can have as many IEP meetings as you need to meet the needs of your child. So if you had your IEP meeting on November 3rd, and here it is February 1st and things are not going well, we're going to request to reconvene the IEP or to have it again. So what to expect is that you can ask to reconvene anytime during the course of the year to discuss concerns about your child's performance or the IEP, or maybe the IEP is rock solid and you think it would be great, but they're just not doing it properly. So we can ask for an IEP at any time to discuss any of these things. What we're going to remember is we're always going to make meeting requests via email. Your request does not count if you ask the teacher in carpool. Your request does not count if you send it on a little piece of note paper in your child's folder. Your request doesn't count if you send it by carrier pigeon. It counts if you send it by email. And if you are asking for it and we're using the right language, Christy's exactly right. If you request it, they have to do it. If they don't, they actually have to discuss why. They have to disclose why they won't have the meeting. And let me tell you, that doesn't happen because every school knows if they deny a parent the right to their student's IEP meeting, no judge is going to uphold that. So when we make our request, we're going to say, I am formally requesting to reconvene my child's IEP. I expect to hear from you by, and I usually give them a few days. If this request is denied, I need a written communication as to why. And that lets them know, oh, this mom knows that she is legally entitled to have as many IEP meetings, so we better go. Loretta says, it's amazing how many people don't know that. Yeah. And she says, I think we are heading into our 3rd or 4th IEP meeting since August. Try to spread that around as much as you can. Absolutely. Yeah. Parents they just think you can only have one, and that's just not accurate. Who attends? So this is different depending on what the need is. If your student is just having problems in math, then you might just want to talk with the math person, more like a parent-teacher conference kind of style. But if you feel like, no, this needs to be the whole IEP because this is not working or it's not being followed and I want documentation proving what you've done, then you go for the whole IEP meeting. And everybody who is in that whole IEP meeting should be there. So the regular education teacher, the special education teacher, the ODR, all the service providers. Now, if you're trying to do this quickly, the school might say, oh, well, we can do it, but the nurse isn't on our campus that day. And you can waive that person's attendance. You can say, that's fine, I want to meet anyway. And that's always an option for those additional service providers. When you make the reconvene request, so if you just want to talk about, Jamie, if you just want to talk about a certain subject and it's more like a parent-teacher conference, I'd be real clear about that. But if you want to reconvene the IEP, that means the whole team. Superintendent, almost never see them at meetings. ODR, every time we have an IEP meeting, the ODR should be there. Now, that's not to say I haven't seen the ODR come in, sign the first page saying they were there, then they disappear for 45 minutes, then they come back for a minute or two, and they disappear again, and they come back. What I do is I write down ODR signed in 11:02, left 11:03, returned at 11:57, left again at 12:01. I document all of that. Mandy, the ODR is the official designated representative. It's the person that has the authority to speak on behalf of the school. So it's almost always the principal. If it's not the principal, it's the vice principal, assistant principal. It can be the school guidance counselor. It can be a dean, whoever that principal has designated to be the school's representative. Again, how to be effective. Please just go prepared. Make your binder. Whoops, sorry, not yet. Fooled you. Bring your binder with all of your kids' documentation. The calmer you feel going in and being prepared and having everything laid out very nicely, the calmer you can feel during the actual meeting, which the actual meeting can feel pretty overwhelming. All right, now it's the break. So it is 6:09. Let's take a little brain break, a little bio break, and we'll get started again at 6:15. Guys, while we're waiting for that 6:15 mark, if anybody wants to ask questions that are like kind of specific to your own kid, please feel free.
Hello,
Hi.
it's Jamie. I decided to not let you be alone and share my camera too. But
Hey.
hey, I am really new to the IEP things. My son is really little. He's 8, but I've always struggled with an IEP, just not really knowing a lot about how to kind of read it and break it down. And
Mm-hmm.
so that took me a while to decipher. But now I'm working with a school. So my question is like, what about, so I do my best to try and keep the line of communication very open. Unfortunately, I don't always get the same feedback from schools. Like my child, he's kind of switched like 3 schools now, and I'm thinking of switching again. And I just don't, I feel like maybe it's just kind of me and maybe not switching him so much because it's going to give him, like maybe some stress and moving around a lot because we literally move for him, so we've been
Yeah,
moving parishes and
I
right
get
now, yeah. And right now we're in Livingston and it's hard.
that.
This is a hard parish, but we're thinking of going like probably traveling over to Ascension Parish. I hear great things over there, but
You
I
know
don't
what?
want
The grass
to.
is not necessarily greener on the other side. The grass is greener
Right.
where you water it. I can tell
Right.
you, as an advocate, I spend most of my time in Ascension, Livingston, and Zachary. And those are the 3 parishes people flock to because great schools, but it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that, you're automatically guaranteed a great experience.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we went to and I'm one of those kind of travel parents, but I do want to kind of get my kids settled down, especially since my son now we have there he's a little sister, and so we're trying to get more settled and just kind of find like the school because I feel like it's a relationship. But um, things I've kind of been struggling with is I've asked to reconvene, but now that I'm learning that an email was the official way. Maybe that's why they didn't, they kind of just kept putting it off. And then also, sometimes I request certain things that I never get. So, how do I follow up? Because my biggest fear is that I don't want to have the relationship with the school be maladaptive or like abrasive in any manner just because I drop my kid off and I leave him there, with
Yeah.
I don't want, I hear horror stories. And so how do I like get what I need and what I want and what's best for my child without like ruffling any feathers, I guess.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, first thing is awesome job being that like super proactive mom who wants to pave the way for their kid. I totally appreciate that. um, Making your request via email is always the #1 recommendation because say you ask for example, I'm not really feeling certain that my kid is getting his extended time on his tests. I'd like you to document on the test papers when he's
Okay.
given extended time. You can absolutely ask for that.
Okay.
I would do it via email. And then I
Okay.
would watch for the next test paper. And every single time a test paper comes home and it doesn't have extended time written on the top of it, I would email and say, hi, the science test came home and it didn't say anything about extended time. Can you please give me some insight into that? And then that will let those teachers know, oh crap, this is a mom who is going to be on the ball. And it's not to say that teachers aren't trying their best. Believe me, we're out there kicking it every day. But when you're given 20, 30 plus kids that
Right.
have special needs, you can't keep every ball in the air every single day.
Right.
But for those squeaky wheel parents, you learn to prioritize what needs to be prioritized.
Yeah.
So my big advice, email and be the squeaky wheel. And then
Okay.
if you do move schools, I would absolutely suggest asking for a meeting at the beginning of the year or whenever it is that you switch.
Okay.
Just to say, I really thank you guys so much for all coming and agreeing to this meeting. I really, really just want to get on the same page because we're all on the team for your kid, or whatever your kid's name is.
Right. Ethan.
Yeah. Ethan.
Yeah.
And also a thing that I really love to do, and I'll try to send you guys all a reminder to do it in the end of July, is writing an introduction to my kid letter. So I write one every year for both of my girls. They both have some special needs. And I just write like, here's my kid, and here are the things that are hard for her. Here are the things that she really is great at. And then if you're having an issue, here's some ideas. And it really lets them know like, oh, this mom is like really proactive. She must be really engaged, really involved with her kid.
Yes, because I like coming up. I'm sorry, I don't want to take too much time. Sorry. But I like coming up to the school, but a lot of times I wasn't let in the school. And so they would tell me about like HIPAA and I couldn't like kind of visit. So that was weird. And then I try to like, hey, talk to the paras, and they didn't want me to talk to the paras. So it was just really strange at first. And I'm like, why do they? And then they wouldn't give me a schedule of my child's day. And I'm like, well, so the moment I drop him off from carpool, I don't know what he does every day. And so, and they wouldn't give me what he's doing. And so I was like,
no,
panicking.
I would definitely push for that schedule. There's some other parents, and I know one is a teacher, and they're like, no, that's not okay. They're blowing up the chat box. They are on your side.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, you can absolutely request in email a copy of your child's schedule.
Okay.
And you don't have to give a reason, but if you want to, like I would say, I want to be able to talk to my kid about their day. It's really helpful if I know where my kid went today.
Right. Yeah. Like what he's doing in a day. Or if I decide to check him out, because I remember one time I was trying to surprise him with something. So I just wanted to check him out this one day to go do the activity. But I end up not knowing when he went to lunch. And so I checked him out, and they pulled him at the lunchroom, and it was just a complete meltdown. And I was like, if I knew what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would make that request to the teacher. And then if a day or two goes by and you haven't heard anything, I would send it again, and I would put second request for whatever in the subject and CC the principal.
Okay. Okay.
Like you gave her the chance to do the right thing for a child, and she did it. And so now we're going to just go up the chain. And if we don't get action there, we're going to keep going up the chain until we get the action we're looking for.
Okay.
Because believe me, you are your kid's #1 most invested advocate.
Yes, I agree completely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. How's everybody's brain? Is anybody melting down? You sticking with me? Yeah. Okay. We're going to do these little brain checks every now and then, because I really do want to know, like, is this way too much information? Do you need some extra processing time? Need some extra information? Please, please. I don't know if you don't tell me. Chrissy says she's fired up. All right. Part 2 today is, how do I get an IEP for my kid? I get that phone call a lot. I need you to get an IEP for my child. And I'm like, oh, that is not something I can produce overnight. That's a whole process. So let's talk about what that process is. And I know for a lot of you guys, maybe you're already through this initial evaluation process. But for some of us, we're still there. So I don't want to leave anyone out. Here's a timeline of the process. Process is long and arduous. When we have a kiddo that has a suspected disability, the first thing that should happen is we're contacting Child Find. Child Find is the specific name of a specific program that is protected under federal law, IDEA, that school districts receive money for. So believe me, it exists. We're going to talk about working with those people in just a second, because it's not always easy. Once you sign that initial consent saying, yes, the school may evaluate my child for special education, which they cannot do without your consent, then they have 60 school days to do that eval. So weekends don't count, school holidays don't count, hurricane days don't count, days because it's raining and the streets are flooded don't count. So that can be a really long time. That can be 3, 4, 4.5, 5 months. After that evaluation is done, everyone will sit down together and have an eligibility determination meeting, where we're going to look at all of the evaluation documents and say either yes, the student qualifies, or no, the student does not qualify for special ed. If we determine, yes, this kid is eligible, then the district has an additional 30 days, school days, to write the IEP. Best practice indicates around 10 to 15 days. I rarely see it go the whole 30 days, but that's how long they get. After you guys have had the IEP meeting and you sign it and you're like, yep, let's go. Let's get started. The school has another 5 days to implement the IEP. So now we're up to almost 100 days before anything has happened with our kid. A lot of times at the IEP meeting, if everything goes well and everybody is in agreement, the district will actually ask you if you would like to sign to waive that 5 days and start immediately. And our IEP, it's being implemented. Everything, we're pretty happy about it. We're going to meet annually. So if your IEP date is February 1st, 2023, then on February 1st, 2024, that IEP expires. So we're going to make sure that we hold that meeting before it expires. Now, something else that I hear, I've heard told to parents is that, well, the school didn't tell me about the meeting in enough time for me to be able to take off work. And they say if I can't get there by Thursday, that my kid's they're not going to get services anymore because if their IEP is going to expire. Do not panic, take a deep breath and call their bluff. They are not in any way, shape, or form allowed to just spontaneously dismiss a kid from special education. If that IEP does expire, they have to pay a big fine. That's why they don't want it to expire. But they also should have given you ample notification of the meeting. What will happen with your child is the services will continue to be provided as they were before they even expired. So nothing different should happen. Remembering too that you can ask for another IEP meeting anytime you want to. So maybe our first one this year was November 3rd. And then in January, we realized it was a big hot mess and we redid the whole thing. And now the new date is January 13th. Well, now that January 13th date, that's our new meeting. Everything is going all right. In 3 years, we're going to evaluate this child again. Now, let me talk a second about the evaluation and the triennial evaluation. That first time they evaluate your kid, they have to have your signed consent. After that, they don't. If they cannot get a hold to you, they can go ahead and start doing their evaluation. Sometimes they'll call you and ask you if you would like to waive your child's evaluation. What that means is you sign saying they don't have to redo the evaluation and your kid will continue on with the same disability category that they were receiving services under. I get asked all the time, should I sign the waiver or should I not sign the waiver? And really that's up to you and that's up to your kid. For a kid, for instance, with a specific learning disability in reading, spelling, and writing, so that's my situation, I want that reevaluation done because I want that updated information on how she is performing cognitively. Where is she? What's the new data? I want the data. However, if I had a kid who had severe anxiety or a child who was doing the evaluation would be such a burden to the child that it wouldn't even be like worth doing. I would not get new valuable information and it would not change their services. I would probably waive it. Some parents sign a waiver not even realizing that that's what they've signed. And then they're like, but no, I wanted my kid reevaluated. We can make that happen. We can go through the proper channels of emails and requests to make sure that that evaluation happens, even if you have signed your waiver and, you know, it doesn't mean you sign it away forever. And the school system can only do one waiver at a time. So say they're evaluated at 10, you sign a waiver at 13, they have to do the 16 year one. So they can't just keep waiving over and over again. All right, let me catch up with the chat. Angela asks, would this still work the same for a child that is being introduced to public school? My child is attending big, but we are going to transfer. So, and then Christy wrote, the district may insist that your child needs to be enrolled first. That's what happened with her. If you are attending big, then my suspicion is that you are an EBR parish. And if you call the pupil appraisal on Goodwood and you say, I need to speak to Child Find, then we can get the ball rolling before being enrolled in an EBR school. You won't get an IEP. The IEP has to happen when the kid is enrolled, but we can get that evaluation process started. And we are going to talk about that a little more in just a second. All right, so child find. Executing the formal request to get your kid evaluated. Like I mentioned, it's the formal process of finding children with disabilities, and it's funded through IDEA. Lots of kids are identified early in life at birth or through a pediatrician's office visit. And then those kids go on to get services through Early Steps. Early Steps ends at age 3, at which point your case manager for Early Steps should basically hand you off to a case manager at pupil appraisal. Sometimes the Early Steps people drop the ball, and then we end up with older kids that aren't receiving services. So what if your child wasn't found early? Child find still applies to your child. What to expect? If you think that your child is a child with a disability, the first step, if they're not already identified, is to contact Child Find. They are sometimes housed in the pupil appraisal office, sometimes housed in the regular school board office, but you can call and ask for the Child Find representative. Every district is required to participate in Child Find. Their funding depends on it. And then the person who will help you will be that pupil appraisal representative. Pupil appraisal is the department responsible for assessment, eligibility decisions, and then basically govern all of special education. Sorry, my husband opened the door and all the pets came in. Yes, please, if you could get them out. What we're going to do is send a formal letter of request using the language of IDEA to let them know that you're making this request and that you know your rights. I have a template, which to date is 100% effective at getting that attention to your kiddo. And if you need that document, I'll be happy to share it with you. Just send me an email afterwards and I'll send you the template. So you'll plug in your own kid's information, date of birth, name, things like that, and send it to your Child Find rep. In the letter, it lets them know that you know your rights, that once you sign consent, they have 60 school days to complete the evaluation, and that you would be happy to sign consent for them to speak to your child's physician or any other service provider they'd like. So it's kind of putting it to them like, I know my rights, but I'm going to be really helpful about it. Roadblock warning, working with pupil appraisal can be a pain. Just because they legally have to evaluate your kid doesn't mean they legally have to be kind about it. Things I've heard is clients that call and say, they won't test my child because they're not old enough yet, which makes no sense because we service kids birth to 22. So if they're born, they're old enough. They said that they don't do it because my kid is in a private school. Again, you have to evaluate our kids under Child Find. If you are a tax-paying citizen within your district, then they have to provide the service. They won't assess my kid because my kid's not failing. They won't assess my kid because we're still doing RTI, which we learned about before the break. If it's been more than 8 to 12 weeks, I'd say we're done with this RTI process. You have enough data. All right, so you get to the evaluation and you're like, oh, amen, gotten to this point. You are on your way to receiving more information about what your child can do. That evaluation, as pertains to special education, is governed by Bulletin 1508 in Louisiana, and that sets the parameters for the eligibility criteria for each of those disability categories we talked about earlier. So this can be really helpful to parents if you want to know, like, what are the exact criteria to be eligible as a student with autism? You can go to 1508 and you can look up the criteria for autism, and there it is in a few paragraphs that say you have to have this, done. So it really gives the parents a little bit of leverage in going into that meeting and knowing what to expect.
So I have a story about that if they want to hear it.
Sure.
So when we went into our first IEP meeting, I had my medical diagnosis and all of that. we were sitting at the table now, and my mom was there, who's a school board member. I mean, there was probably 20 people in the room. Um, and the child find coordinator, she had checked off developmental delay, which we know expires at 9, I think, 9. And she's like, well, he doesn't check enough boxes under autism. I'm like, he has autism. So she's like, but it's different. It's different because it's school. You have to check so many boxes. I said, can I see that list, please? So they gave me the list, and I pointed out in their evaluation where they literally typed that he said things that they went right with the checks. I said, okay, you can check this one because you said this. You can check this one because you said this. And then, finally one of the higher up people in the room was like, put it in for autism. Like, so they will try, some schools will try to put the lesser because they know that at 9 years old, they might be able to let them fall off depending on the situation, but autism doesn't do that. Developmental delay does.
You're
So that
exactly
checklist is important, like what qualifies for what disability.
mm-hmm. You're exactly right. And then Christy wrote in there that they did the same thing to her and said it won't make a difference for his services, but that's not exactly
Right.
true. There are certain
Right.
services that are more or less unlocked with certain disability categories. And that's why I'm a huge proponent of, if you know that your 6-year-old has an emotional disturbance, click emotional disturbance. Let's call it what it is, and then we can align the services properly. They will tell you, oh, well, we choose we choose the services based on the need. And that's absolutely true. We do try to base the services on the kid's need. However, certain disability categories unlock certain things. So if your 6-year-old is emotionally disturbed, let's call it what it is, and then that kid has to receive counseling. They don't have to receive counseling under any other disability category, but if you have an ED kid, you get counseling. So I like to be very precise on if we're going to label, let's label accurately. Yeah. I get real fired up about that, y'all. All right. Once you sign consent, 60 school days, of course, that they don't count all the days that we don't go. I'm trying to click the wrong screen. Hang on. There we go. All right. In that evaluation, your kid will first be screened, and let me bring up the screening areas, for hearing, vision, health, academic cognitive needs, the physical gross motor, physical fine motor, behavior, communication. All of these areas should be screened. But let's talk about a difference between a screening and an assessment. A screening can be literally 2-minute observation where, as the gross motor person, I go and I watch this kid go from their classroom to the cafeteria. They didn't have any problems. Check, screening passed. It can be that simple. So if you think, my kid has proprioceptive issues, so issues with balance and knowing where they are in space, and they might be able to get to point A to point B, but if I'm asking them to go from point A to point B, back to point A, then go to point C, and their bodies physically get lost, that may not show up on a screener. So I want to be really expressive, I suppose, at the beginning of this process to say, I see these problems, and I would put it in writing in my email. My child has these problems. This is what it looks like. I would like this assessed, not just screened. And so that will get you the full occupational therapy screening and assessment. That will get you the full speech therapy assessment. So we're not just having literally a 2-minute screener and then moving on. All right. Yep, same thing I just said, that you want to be assessed, not screened for such and such. What makes the evaluation special is that it should be done on a one-on-one basis, meaning it's not 4 or 5 kids sitting down in a room taking a test. It is that assessor with your child only. And then who's working on all of this? The educational diagnostician typically does the educational testing. A social worker will call you and do a family interview. They will ask everything from how was the pregnancy and birth to did they meet their toileting milestones, sitting up, walking, talking. They'll ask all of this history. As a teacher, I would always, always read that, because you can find out some incredible things about your student that you might not know otherwise. Like, for example, one time I found out that my student had fallen off of a ferry boat into the river and had been pronounced dead as drowned before they resuscitated her. That was important for me to know as a teacher. Like, wow, this child has had some pretty serious trauma. And what I know about traumatic brain injury is that they learn in a cycle. So I'm going to tailor my instruction this way. So when that social worker calls you, I know some of the questions might seem ridiculous or like they don't really apply to anything, but bear with her and answer her questions. An educational psychologist will be there. They can oversee the team and they can administer any of those educational or psychological testing. Your related service providers, so if your kid gets speech therapy, occupational, physical, APE, they'll be there and they'll talk about their area of expertise. And then the school nurse becomes involved if the school has any, or student has any health needs or takes meds. Sometimes somebody will say, oh, well, my kid takes their meds at home. They don't need the nurse to, we don't need a nurse. Be cautious with that about what kinds of medications and the side effects of those medications. So for example, I had a student taking medication to suppress seizures, but it also suppressed his ability to sweat. And living where we do, where it's like 700 degrees with 400% humidity, 10 months of the year, I needed to know that because he could overheat and have a heat stroke very easily. So even if your kid takes the medication at home, be really mindful if there are side effects that we need to know about. That evaluation, again, please put all requests in writing. Send the person facilitating your child's evaluation any private evals that you might have. So you might have an evaluation from a clinical psychologist and an occupational therapist and a speech therapist and a feeding therapist. Send all of that to them. Stay on top of that timeline. They get 60 school days, not a minute more. And if you speak with a member of the team in person or a phone call, or you run into them at the grocery store and you have this wonderful chat about your kid and all the things they're doing, go home, write an email. It was great to see you at Albertsons today. Just wanted to kind of recap what we talked about, this, and this. Thanks so much for the talk. That gives that person, number one, the accountability for that conversation. And number two, the opportunity, if they were misunderstood, to say, oh, no, not that, this. And then you have that in writing. So always follow up with that email. A little bit more about private evaluations. So the language concerning private evals is that the district must take them, quote, under consideration, but they do not have to use them in their decision-making process. And so the next question obviously is why. And this is a great point of frustration, concern, and upset for parents that arrive at the school with their kids' diagnosis of autism, and the school says, well, we have to do our own evaluation. And the parents' brain explodes and they cry and nobody has fun. So this is why. And I don't want to read all of this to you guys, and we only have about 20 minutes left, so I'll leave you to read it on your own. But basically, the difference is a medical diagnosis is used with the criteria from the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So while your student might have autism, it might not affect their ability to learn in the school setting. A 1508 diagnosis or special education is looking at your child's ability to learn in the school setting. So that's why they're a little different. It can be really frustrating, but here's a little bit more information if you kind of want to dig into the differences. All right, so the evaluation is done. Thank goodness, those 60 days are over. And so we're gonna have a meeting to determine, is my kid eligible or not? And so we're all gonna sit down. It's a lot of people. The assessment packet is usually 25 to 35 pages long, can be longer. And everybody is going to be talking about their own unique area of expertise. So there's going to be lots of jargon, lots of acronyms. Please feel free to stop them and say, can you elaborate on that? Can you explain what that is? I don't know what that means. And once you do that once or twice in the meeting, everyone else will catch on to the fact that you want to know about your child, and they will typically then slow down and explain things to you. Bring tissues. I've had clients burst into tears because their kid is eligible and they're so relieved they can hardly stand it. I have had parents burst into tears because their kid was not eligible, and now they're devastated because their kid isn't going to get special education assistance. So just know going into this that this can be a heavy experience. So everybody that has had a hand in that assessment will be at that meeting. How to prepare for yourself. Prepare to hear a ton of information. Like I said, these things are like 20, 30 plus pages long. So go with the understanding that you might be there for a while. You can ask for a copy and write notes on it to follow along. I would absolutely bring your support person. Ask them to slow down. Remember, all these people are here for your kid. They might have 500 other things they have to do today, but they need to slow down because you're the expert on your child and you need to understand what is happening. Jamie's rant, I hate acronyms. Yeah. And she says she always stops the meeting when they use too much alphabet soup, and good for you because you are the most important person in that meeting. So what happens after eligibility is determined? If your kid is eligible, then the school has that 30 days to write the IEP, 10 days being best practice. If your child is not eligible, that is not the end of the story. They should automatically say, well, your child is not eligible for an IEP. However, they qualify for a 504 plan or an IAP. If that does not happen, then you will make that request verbally in the meeting and then make it again when you get home via email. Because if the child is suspected of having a disability, even if they don't, okay, Howard, please stop it. Y'all, my 90-pound dog is like trying to get in my lap. They don't qualify for special education, it doesn't mean that we don't do anything. No, we support this child. Yeah, hi, how are you? If you talk to him, he will probably talk back. So if you have that IEE though, and you do not agree, and I'll tell you, there are evaluations that I have sat in and I'm like, this is a garbage evaluation. First off, there's copy and paste errors all throughout. I'm finding other kids' names in this child's evaluation. The birthday is wrong. The school site is wrong. Teachers' names are wrong. Well, then how do I know that this is accurate data? This could be some other kid's data. I call them out immediately and request an IEE, which they don't want to have to do, but they have to legally do it. That is an independent educational evaluation that you don't have to pay for. It is done at public expense, and you are entitled to one IEE per school-based evaluation. And you are entitled to one district-based evaluation per year. So if you have your kid evaluated in 3rd grade, for instance, and then something crazy comes up and you're like, we need another evaluation because we have this whole new concern in 4th grade. You can do another evaluation and say that one is garbage and it's a copy-paste disaster. You can ask for an IEE. And so they then have to provide you with directions for how to proceed with the IEE experience. And again, you don't pay for it. Should be on. All right, brain check. Anybody's brain melting? Okay.
No, not melting yet.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we're good.
You didn't use a lot of acronyms, so I'm totally fine.
You know, I try to be very mindful of that. And if I use them, at least explain it.
Yes, so I can take like a little key the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I just stopped the meeting. Like one time, I just stopped my meeting. I was like, no. And they were like, what's wrong? I'm like, too many acronyms. Like, I'm freaking out with the alphabet soup. And they're like, the what?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just too many. But I don't have any. I do have, well, I was trying to, okay, so I got a note home in my child's backpack and they're like, this teacher doesn't go, his teacher doesn't go to school anymore. I was like, oh. And they're like, please check your remind. And so I did, but I don't know who this new teacher is now. So is that just kind of like moseying on up there? Because I thought this was sent on a note, but they haven't yet.
So was this his special education teacher or a
Yeah,
regular?
his sped teacher is gone.
Yeah, we're gonna need to know who the new special education teacher is immediately. I would
Okay.
I would email the principal.
Okay.
And did you say you're in Livingston?
Yeah, I'm in Livingston.
I might even CC Eric Penalber. That's
Yep.
your special education
Okay.
superintendent.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And so he and I have gone lots of rounds, but the law is written on the side of the child. So the child should always be the winner. Like, I don't need to be the winner. The kid needs to be the winner.
Right.
You don't need to be the winner. The kid needs to be the winner.
Right.
But yes, I would ask the principal if you don't get an answer within 2 days, I would send it again. Second request, CC Eric Penalber.
All right. Yes. Thank you.
You are welcome. Angela says, as prepared as I'm trying to be about this, it is still terrifying for me. Is that normal? My fear is my child who clearly needs special education services could be denied. Yeah, that's normal. I'm a special education professional. And it's only like this year, my kid is in 6th grade, that I'm like, I go in feeling like a boss, you know, like I go in feeling like I might throw up. It's so much easier to go and advocate for someone else's kids because it's not tied to, you know, my biological being. Bring that support person with you. And if you have questions about any of the things that we talked about tonight, call me, email me, please. Like, you don't have to go through this situation by yourself. And if you get that evaluation back and it says, no special ed, we're going to request an IEE. We're going to request that independent educational evaluation where somebody else not affiliated with the school has to evaluate your kid. And then if it comes back, yes, we're eligible, fantastic. We move forward, we create the I.E.P. Everything's, you know, hopefully fixed at that point. If it comes back also that says, no, still not, that's okay. We go for an I.A.P. and we get all the accommodations that your kid needs to be able to access the curriculum. So the difference between the I.A.P. and the I.E.P., both can have accommodations. Both absolutely provide accommodations. An I.A.P. or 504 plan doesn't do specialized education. That's what the I.E.P. does. But we can get tests read aloud, extended time, preferential seating, breaks between tasks, study guides, prior notice of tests. All of those things also can be done on an I.A.P. So don't panic to the point of giving yourself an anxiety attack about your kid being eligible for an IEP. I know that that's like the gold standard is what you probably really want, but it's not like the last final option. And Christy says that she is a special education teacher. Her son has autism and it's overwhelming for her. I can't tell you how many IEP meetings I go to with teachers that know this stuff, but they just want another person there just to make sure that they're not steamrolled.
I have a random question too. So I've been really trying to get my son physical education, PE, and they said, well, they told me that they didn't put him in PE because, you know, he can't really understand the instruction in the general ed PE. And so he's not been having PE, but they said he has a recess. And I'm like, that's not PE. And so I don't know. I've been asking for PE, even in IEPs, but he's still not getting PE. And so I don't know is that something I could reconvene to ask?
Yep.
For?
Yep.
Okay. Because
Yep.
I'm like,
and if
I
he
would like him to be in PE.
If he needs more support to be able to access PE, then we send a paraeducator with him, or we send a special ed teacher with him. You can't just go from having it fully all by yourself independent to nothing.
Right.
There are a spectrum of options in the middle of that, whether it is he goes for the first half, if that's all he can tolerate, or he goes with someone. And Christy says, like, in the general ed requirement, students are required to have PE. Yeah, they have to have a number of.
What's
Great.
APE? Sorry.
Okay, that's adapted PE. So if
Okay.
your student can't physically perform in PE, then maybe they get their own PE, which is working on things on their level. So for example, if I have a kid in a wheelchair, we're going to be maybe working on upper body strength building activities.
Right.
Either way, they should get that. And if you're concerned about inclusion and like having your son participate with non-disabled peers,
Yeah.
going to PE is a pretty great idea because
Right.
there.
I've been asking and I really want him to do PE. Like I know he's not very verbal and he does have some kind of, his body in relation to his environment issues at times. But I don't think he can ever learn if he's not going to PE. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And there's almost for everything that you would do in PE, there's something that you can do along those lines with a student who
Okay.
needs more. So like, just for example, maybe the kids are playing basketball. He can work with a peer and they can practice passing, bouncing it back and forth to one another. So there are things that can be done.
Like what I'm reading, what Loretta's saying, that's my son. He can't throw and catch balls. Like he can't do a lot of the stuff. And so I've been asking for a PE. I'm like, I don't know why they tell me he can't go.
Yeah. They're going to need to figure that out is the answer to that, no matter what it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Christy has a great idea. If he's not already eligible for APE, which look through the evaluation, and because they might have done this already, then request an APE evaluation.
Okay.
Yeah. But they're telling you no is definitely not the end all.
Okay.
All right, so here's all of the acronyms that we saw today. I didn't use them all just because this is not your lingo. Like for example, I didn't use OHI, other health impaired. That's one of the disability categories. But every week at the end of the presentation will be this, the list of acronyms. So if you want to have your own little acronym cheat sheet, feel free. All right, so that is the end of week 1. Guys, nobody's brain melted. I'm so glad that you were all here. Spread the word if you know of anybody else who should be in here and learning these things. I don't care if they start in week 2. It doesn't matter to me. If anybody wants to switch to in-person and then go back to virtual, I don't care. That's fine with me. So really, you can't offend me. Ask me any question. If I don't know the answer, I will help you find it. If you have questions after this and you're like, oh gosh, yes, I don't know about this, just send me an email. It might be something that we're going to cover. If it's not, I'll make sure that it's something that we cover. Next week, we are going to be picking apart the IEP and talking about what is it, what should be written in all of these little boxes, and why each part is important. Because a lot of times on an IEP, I'll see NA in a box, and it makes me want to light the IEP on fire because these things are applicable to our kids. All right. I recorded this, so hopefully if I can figure it out. I'm not the most tech savvy person. I'm going to put this up on somewhere on the internet. So I will let you guys know when that happens. That way, if you have somebody who wants to come next week, but they're like, oh, but I didn't hear week 1, they can go back and hear week 1.